ARM64 or AR64, which is the generic term for it. And we can do that in the servers. This isn't Raspberry Pi. This is a 128 core server. So anyways, so let's go through. What do we need to do 1.3 million requests per second? So good size things. The assumption here is 2 CPUs per server, 2U form factor, 42U rack. So what you need are, a whole lot of Intel chips, servers, and they go about 850 watts per server, where an AR64 is 705. And there's so many less servers that you use. Now, Intel will tell you, hey, but we're so fast, if you fine tune something, you can get incredible performance out of it. How many of you need a dragster to go that quarter mile? No. But now what can you do as DevOps? This little chart here shows you that your CTO, your people who write the checks actually do listen to you. So make the recommendations to move to an AR64. Now, are you just gonna believe me as somebody who works with this? No, go out there, check them out. There's a whole lot of ways to get free ones. Oracle has, on the cloud, has an always free tier. You can go to any one you like. AWS has Graviton, use that too, although we prefer to use the others. And then the last thing is join the communities that are out there. ARM has their own Discord, looking for, just look for those server clouds. We have a generic AR64 community, so come and join us. So please go out there, try this stuff out. Let's kind of save the planet by not building another data center. And thank you.
All right, thanks, Aaron. Hey, let's give it up one more time for all our Ignite speakers. And next up, we've got Ignite Karaoke. And I believe we have 5 volunteers.
Whoever wants to do Ignite Karaoke, the first 5 that show up.
Whoever wants to do Ignite Karaoke, come on up. I think we're 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. I think we're good. So talk amongst yourselves and figure out which 5 of you. Or I don't know, I'm just gonna pick. Yeah. Okay. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Is that cool? All right. Sorry. All right. So the way this works, if you weren't here yesterday, Ignite Karaoke is our fun break in between our sessions on all day. It's a 1-minute Ignite talk that these fine folks are going to do. They do not know what the slides are, and they auto-advance every 15 seconds. So Michael's setting it up. I'm going to hand this over to you. Kick it off.
Awesome. And to answer the other question that we had earlier, if anybody else was wondering, no, these are not the same slides from yesterday. They have to be new things. And again, I know the live stream has a shout out to a lot of the other DevOps days in other cities that actually contributed. We asked, hey, can we get some different slides for Ignite Karaoke? And boy, they delivered. The DevOps community always has really good memes. All right, so first victim, again, volunteer. All right, you ready? We'll do it anyways. It's a polar bear on a piece of marble. No iceberg. In front of Big Ben, I think. Oh, it is at that stern wheel steamboat turned into a casino. Yes. Get your FinOps here. Oh no, not them. I'm not musical enough for that on the fly right now. Definitely not musical enough. Can you get some cash up for that?
No, that's okay here in North Carolina yet. Definitely don't think that's okay here in North Carolina yet. Maybe some Doobie Brothers for it next time.
Hey, I'm Scott. Super excited to be here at DevOps Days Raleigh. Thank you. All right, so you may be looking at this and going, what does a super sci-fi monster with a wide open mouth have to do with DevOps? And I'm here to tell you that basically, absolutely nothing. Has nothing to do with what we're doing here at DevOps. Now, this is our team of interns that we brought in this year. We found that they do have some supernatural powers to help us get some things done a little bit faster than normal, but the one in the front's really scary, and we kind of stay away from her. Now, this is her family that we also had to interview as part of the process of bringing everybody in. You'll notice they really love that checkered red outfit thing, and we really had to squash that when she came to work for us. It was really ugly. So, in conclusion, it was straight out of Raleigh. We're rocking the world. We've got some amazing things going on. It's really cool stuff, fast, economical, and easy to do. So bring it on down. We're ready to go.
It's really fun. Okay. You know, that's what a new software project always looks like in the beginning when you're trying to get executive buy-in. Somebody says, it looks super great. Oh my God, we totally have to do this. And then the executives buy in, and you get a project manager, and suddenly, strange things are happening, folks. You get the software developers in here, and they're saying, who came up with this dumb idea? There's no way this is going to work, and you can't have it by next Tuesday. You can only do it so fast, and frankly, whatever the heck that is in the background is scary. Now, this is the testing and development process. You've all been there. You've all done testing iteration, and you know exactly what this is. Clearly, there is no way out until somebody brings in a bulldozer, which I hope is what the next slide is. No, unfortunately, I get this guy. Okay, I've seen statistics about how many software projects fail. There are somewhere between 75 and 150. What do you call a failure? What do you call a success? If you hit 50% of your goals, did you win?
Howdy, I'm Alex, and I've just decided that I'm going to talk about DevOps culture. So this is typically the development team when really they're doing anything. Most of us spend our days not really doing anything but pretending we do things like this. I know I do. You know you all do too. Deleting cookies. See, you should automate this. Why? Because DevOps is automation. It's all about not doing the work. You can delete cookies regularly, but isn't it better if you just automate it? So next up is, actually know where this is from. This is all of us after we failed to deliver software on time because we didn't adhere to our DevOps processes. We decided not to automate the things. And this is finally where all software ends up. It's always a Unix system. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. It's always 100% a Unix system. I think that's it.
Hello, everyone. My name is Tiana Dodd, aka Tenacious Tia. I am a DevOps engineer for the National Basketball Association. And, even though our players play, sometimes I get a little lazy. Okay, you know what I'm saying? I'm doing my code, but really, I'm just trying to automate my way out of a job. I'm not really trying to do too much. But when I first started in engineering, I would look at a screen like this and say, oh, what did I get myself into? I should have stuck to chorus and theater because this is ridiculous. Let me just shut this computer down. But they gave me the keys to the kingdom. And I was like, are you sure you want to do that? Like I could actually break pride. I'm really a junior developer. Everything was on fire. But I was just, looking at memes on the computer. I was just doing my best to get through each and every day. And then, finally, I got some mentorship. I got myself a couple of certs. And I'm like, hey, I know what I'm doing now. And I'm living the dream.
That was great. Thank you to all the participants. That was a lot of fun.
One more round of applause for the Ignite Talks and the Ignite Karaoke. That was awesome. That was awesome. I hope the people that did Ignite Karaoke submit Ignite Talk next time. That's the stages. You do Ignite Karaoke, then you get selected for a keynote, because that's less difficult than an Ignite, and then you go pro tier for the Ignite Talks, right? 5 minutes, auto advancing. Are you all ready for the next talk? You want to hear some awesome stuff about securing your CI/CD pipelines? Make sure that your systems are in a good state for delivering software. Awesome. The other thing is we've got the open spaces starting up. So 145, there's a bunch of different topics. So if there's an open space that you're interested in having a great conversation with fellow community members, go check those out. How we looking? Which Ignite talk did y'all like? All of them? That's the right answer. What are some topics that y'all will like to see next year? Anyone? Hey, organizers, we did it. We covered every single thing everyone wanted to hear. Anything? Anyone want? Is there some topics missing? Quite a bunch, huh? ChatGPT, for sure. We'll just have a sidetrack of just automated talks. All right, we looking good? We're testing it always. Who went to the, I think I already asked this one, actually. Never mind. Who's going to do Ignite Karaoke next year? You're inspired? There we go. At least one person. You're first up next year. Okay? Yes. All right. Oh, no, it's okay. We'll get it working. You came all the way out here. We want to see your pretty slides with all the good information. So I think next year we're going to try to do a similar mix of cultural topics like organization, how you organize your team topologies, how you convince your management that you're doing the actual things that you promised to do with DevOps, and then also these technical talks. Who here likes seeing demos of tools or going into the weeds of code? Okay. Who here wants to see more of the kind of cultural, organizational, building teams kind of content? All right. Cool. With respect to the code one, what kinds of things do you want to see? Anyone? Just yell it out. Yeah.
Demos.
Demos? But demos of what?
Demos of computing.
What's that?
Demos of cutting edge tools.
Cutting edge tools. All right. So like that MLOps one that we had earlier today, yeah, that was super interesting. I think we're going to see a lot more of that kind of tooling and those kind of architectures coming up to our industry pretty quickly nowadays. Are we almost there? Okay, why don't we do this? Why don't we do this? Let's take a 10-minute break. So we'll be back at 2:05, and then we'll kick this off, and we'll go right from Sharon to Carlos. That work? All right. Thank you all for your patience while we figure this out. We'll be back here in 10 minutes. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. I'm here to talk about the security of your CI/CD pipeline. I was trying to figure out how to put this talk together in my head for like a couple of weeks, and I finally put some sense to it. It was a random collection of observations and facts that I've made from talking to a bunch of different teams. And actually, I realized that what this actually comes down to is a set of just like basic InfoSec principles, just applied to the specific problem of your CI/CD pipeline. So that's how I'm going to walk through this talk. And the spoiler is Nirmal made you cheer about zero trust before. He was making fun of me. It's because it's the zero trust principles that can really help us put some sense to all of the chaos in our pipelines. The real zero trust principles, the NIST zero trust principles, not the marketing person zero trust principles, but the real legit ones. And by the way, just as an aside, if you ever get tired of hearing about zero trust, I really recommend you go download the NIST publication from 2020 and read the executive summary. It's actually awesome. You're all gonna love it. It's really useful. So that's what I'm talking about when I mean zero trust. It's actually really, really good. I was also tired of hearing the word zero trust until I read that. So let me just start a little bit about myself. And whoever is in charge here, I have no idea what the time is, so you need to give me markers. Good. So just a little bit about myself. I am currently the CEO and co-founder of a company called Bastion Zero. We provide secure passwordless access to server Kubernetes and database infrastructure. My story is I started out as a telecom engineer in the early 2000s. That was before there was DevOps. What I was effectively doing is what people do with DevOps now with networks. Then I went and did my PhD, and I ended up studying cryptography and information security with a background in engineering. So I became a network security researcher and also a professor at Boston University. After that, most of my work was on the security of internet protocols like BGP, DNS, NTP. Does anyone remember having to update all your NTP daemons in 2015? That was my group. Welcome. So that was one of the big groups focused on that research with my research. And worked a bunch with the IETF. Then after that, I got into blockchain. I started a blockchain startup. There's a big sad face over there. Got out of that and then started Bastion Zero. So that's my story. And if you want to know why there's a sad face, you can talk to me later. Stories. Okay, so why are we talking about your CI/CD pipelines and why is this interesting for the people who are here? Who remembers what happened on January 4th? Did people see this, the Circle CI breach? So I was like wrapping up my day. It was 10 p.m. and I opened Twitter and I saw this notification and then I read this message and the bottom line really struck me. Thank you for your urgent attention to rotating your secrets. I've never seen a notification like that before. How many people remember that moment? Yeah, okay, not that many, interesting moments. So to me, that was really, to me, a very big moment. And then I was like, what is going on here? And that's how we started thinking about, that's how I started thinking about putting together this talk about like all the different components of the CI/CD pipeline and how they play into the security. Okay, so let's go back and see what happened, why Circle CI was breached, why it's a big deal to think about the security of your CI/CD pipeline and what we can do about it. So CI/CD, the D in CD stands for deploy. So if you're going to deploy, you need credentials to production. You need access to production. And so if the pipeline needs access to production, it's a very, very privileged and powerful part of your infrastructure, right? And I don't need to tell you this. But if an adversary can actually get in there, then they can get access to all kinds of things. The list of 7 items that I have here is from Circle CI's blog post where they talk about all of the different kinds of credentials that you needed to rotate, right? That you would need to rotate as a result of them getting breached. And so, these things can be very powerful. They can be keys to the APIs, things like your AWS APIs, keys to your repos, all sorts of really important keys that you're using to actually push code and update your infrastructure. And so if those get leaked, it's a big problem, right? So what happened on January 4th? We learned that, well, let's just start with how Circle CI works. So Circle CI has lots of different modes that you can operate it in. In the hosted mode, there's a SaaS service. You upload your secrets into a vault that SaaS service maintains for you. Whenever you want to do a job, it spins up a runner. The runner gets credentials out of the vault that Circle CI is storing for you of your credentials. And then now that runner has the credentials to actually do things in the infrastructure, access servers, access APIs, whatever it needs to do, right? So your credentials are sitting in that green box, the one with the lock on it. And so if an adversary is able to, right, and so if an adversary is actually able to compromise that infrastructure that's holding your piece of your infrastructure, then they have access to your infrastructure, and that's the risk. Okay, so that's why this was a problem, because what happened was their database was breached. Their database was holding the credentials for all their customers. So if your credentials were in there, they were potentially breached, and that's why people were up in the middle of the night rotating secrets, because those secrets were leaked. So you have to rotate as fast as you can, change the secret as fast as you can, so that the window during which you could be breached is minimized, right? And we had teams. You were doing that? Yeah. Right. So there's two problems, right? One problem is like you could get breached, and the other problem is you have to turn everything off, so you can't build anything for several days, right? So there was a lot of disruption, at least for people that have been on the system, right? So at the very least, even if you don't care about security, which if you're in this room, you should care about security, you're in DevOps. But even if you don't care, you should care about this in terms of productivity. Okay, so where I come from, the world that I come from, the first thing that we always tell people is to get rid of long-lived credentials, simply because when you have long-lived credentials and they're a breach, then you need to do something about them as fast as possible, and it creates a lot of risk for you. If you look at a lot of the big breaches that happen, they result from long-lived credentials. That's why in the Zero Trust principles, we always talk about getting rid of long-lived credentials. This is a very good practice. But I'm not going to come here and stand up in front of a bunch of DevOps people and tell them, get rid of all your long-lived credentials tomorrow, because that's not going to happen. It's not really possible to do that for everything that you have, right? So the first thing that I learned, having talked to a bunch of teams, was really like, I talked to a friend. He works at a big top of market tech company, and he told me he spent 2 weeks rotating one credential. Why did it take him 2 weeks to rotate one credential? Because he didn't know where it was used, right? So he would like change it, and then it would break something, and then something else would break, and he was doing this 2-week audit of like all these teams across the whole organization to try to figure out where was this even secret being used so that he could change it, because he couldn't change it until all these places had changed it, right? And so one thing is, if you are going to have a long-lived secret and it is in your pipeline, it would be really cool if it was the only place it was used, right? Right, so if you're getting a registration key or an API key, get a unique key for your pipeline. In case something bad happens to the pipeline, you can rotate that key by itself very quickly without affecting anyone else, right? So having these unique, if you have to have a long-lived secret, minimizing the reuse of that secret can be very helpful. Okay, so, and that is just something that you can see if anyone lived through this breach and tried to do the rotation of credentials, you can see how much time you can save with something like that. Okay. The next thing is, how many people looked at this picture and said, I would never use a cloud-hosted CI/CD tool? How many people had that instinctual reaction? No one had? Yeah. You're supposed to have it, right? But I don't buy that. Okay, so like, I think that a lot of places and a lot of people will say, well, you know, CircleCI was breached. It's a hosted tool. I will never host my passwords with a third-party provider, right? And, you know, I'll host them myself, and since I'm hosting them myself, they'll never get hacked because I'm hosting it myself, okay? I don't buy this as an actual argument for why you have security. This may help a little bit, but if your security strategy is based on I self-host my runner, everything is okay, I don't think that's a good strategy. And I'm willing to stand here before you and say this to you. And I can send you some references of all sorts of attacks that happen to self-hosted runners, right? I do think that there is another argument to be made about using IP level ACLs or IAM policies to like limit the locations that credentials can be reused. So for example, if that green box is holding some credentials, you may say that, you know, this SSH key can only be used out of this IP range, right? That could be a reasonable restriction that you could do, but I would like to remind you that, by the way, you can also do that even with cloud services, right? So this is not, to me, like a strong argument for why this is the only way to solve the problem. On the self-hosted question, for example, how many Jenkins? People familiar with Jenkins? Right, so how many CVEs in Jenkins? If you look at the CVE listing, it's 1,000, 1,400 CVEs in Jenkins. So if you run Jenkins, you need to maintain Jenkins. It's not a cakewalk to run Jenkins. It requires a lot of patching. And so classic issue with self-hosted systems is you better patch them, right? And especially for something like Jenkins. This is a really cool article that I've linked, and I'll post this on LinkedIn after my talk so you can grab it. There's a really cool article by the NCC group, which is they do pen testing, and these guys were able to get into a Jenkins server because they were able to find an open S3 bucket and pivot from an open S3 bucket to credential another directory about the Jenkins server, dumped 200 different credentials, right? So just the fact that something is self-hosted is not going to necessarily save you. And finally, Jenkins can be frightening, so this was a really interesting one. This attack that they did, they had a case, an engagement where the customer had checked grant read permissions to all authenticated users, and also checked use GitHub repository permissions. And for some reason, I read these like 50 times. For some reason, this meant that any GitHub user, like anyone who could log into GitHub, could therefore log into the server. I don't know why. So Jenkins is confusing and scary. So anyway, like you don't have to. I don't think I need to convince you that yes, pipelines can be frightening, but there has been sort of like a lot of issues with this stuff. So then I thought, okay, I have all this stuff and I'm complaining, and what's the problem? But let's put some sense to this, right? So I went back to the NIST definition of zero trust, and actually there's a lot of good stuff in there that actually explains sort of like where this is coming from. And the first thing. Sorry for the busy slide, and ignore the screen here, which you can hear. This is what I want to see over here, right? There's a really important concept in the zero trust definition, which is that network location does not imply trust, right? So one of the principles of zero trust is just because you're behind my VPN does not mean it's secure. Just because you're in my VPC does not mean it's secure. You need more than that in order to provide security, right? And so that's why, sort of, for me, like, the argument that something's self-hosted, okay, you want to self-hosted, fine, good, but you still need to think about other things, right? And that's what I want to talk about next. Okay, next piece. So principle number 3, again, straight from the zero trust document by NIST, access should be granted with least privileges. So least privilege access. If you remember, there was a talk by Tim Becker in the morning, and he had that really cool meme, can I have access? And if I was a pitchfork, I said, no. He would have shared his meme with me last week, so we'll have to see it again. But let's look at some of the things that we might want to do in terms of least privilege in a CI/CD pipeline. The first thing is which user actually has access to the pipeline, right? We have a pipeline, lots of people can initiate jobs or do things in the pipeline. Which users can access which part of the pipeline and which secrets in the pipeline, right? And what you want to do is prevent that there's some user there that's compromised and therefore can get access to the secrets for your entire organization's infrastructure, right? And that sounds ridiculous, but again, I'm going back to this NCC blog post that I was reading when I made this talk, right? They had shared runners that they were using. This is GitLab. So they had GitLab pipeline and shared runners. And the shared runners had basically all of the credentials to everything. And so the way you would do a pipeline is you would use the shared runner, which had the credentials to all of the things, and then you would do your build, right? So that meant that if I showed up as the intern, who's also a malicious intern, let's say, and I set up a pipeline, I would be able to use any credential that I saw in the shared runners, use them and access whatever I wanted, right? So there wasn't good scoping of who can use, this information when they're creating a pipeline. So the first thing to think about when you think about least privilege is really around like, who is it that can touch, who is it that can touch what part of the pipeline, right? So scope the users to the pipeline, so that you don't have one user that can access everything. You may have users that are malicious. You want to make sure that what they can scope is only limited to what they can touch is only limited to the scope that they can touch. Another question about scoping is scoping the pipeline's access to the infrastructure, right? So what do I mean here? There's lots of different ways to set up a pipeline. I don't pretend to be able to go through them all. But what I wanted to kind of walk through was the idea of like using some sort of runner that has access to a service account that therefore grants it access to some parts of the infrastructure, right? So in this example, I've got this orange box here, which is a service account. The kind of things that you can do, for example, is to use policies or RBAC to grant least privilege access to the infrastructure. So you may say, this is a service account for this type of build process or this project, right? This project only has access to this account and it can only, do these certain things, but it can't write to the database or it can't, spin down servers, it can only spin up servers, whatever is appropriate, right? You can use these kinds of policies to say, making sure that different parts of your pipeline are only touching the right part of the infrastructure. Another thing is there's time-based restrictions that you can use. So using policies to say, maybe we only build at midnight, right? Or in this pipeline, we only build at midnight. So there shouldn't be something that is actually pushing to production any time of day. It only happens at a certain time, so we can timely access. Other things that you can do include actually requiring that there was a real code push for the service account to actually touch the infrastructure, right? So in this example, what I'm drawing is effectively the service account, the credentials here, they're actually useless unless there is a real deploy, and only at that point do the credentials actually get turned on and used and be used to access the pipeline. So this is one of the things that we built into our tool, but you can do this in lots of different ways, depending on how, depending on the ways that you're interfacing with infrastructure, right? You can do this directly to AWS, you can do this into a password vault, you can do all sorts of mechanisms that really limit the extent to which a service account can actually touch things. Okay, and the objective is to reduce the blast radius. So even if someone steals the credentials for the service account, they're useless outside of the circumstances of the right time, the right set of infrastructure, the right deploy and all of that happening. And so that actually limits the risk that a theft of those credentials, like what happened with Circle CI, actually causes damage. Right? That's the idea. So you want to limit the risk that something like Circle CI being breached or your Jenkins server being breached. Someone steals your credentials, exfiltrates them, and starts using them from somewhere else in the world. They shouldn't be that useful, right? They don't actually have that much access, so they can't actually. The last thing is log everything, and I think we all know this, right? When we have jobs, we want to be logging at the pipeline. We also want to be logging at the infrastructure. We want to collect all of this information because it will allow us to help with compliance and check when things go wrong. And of course, our friends at NIST have included this in the zero trust principles. So number 5, the enterprise monitors and measures the integrity and security posture of all those and associated assets, right? So the idea of logging as part of the pipeline, as part of the compliance and security mechanism here is really valuable. So now we get to my favorite part of the zero trust guidelines. My slides are almost up. But here we have the number 6, all resource authentication and authorization are dynamic and strictly enforced before access is allowed. So what that effectively means is we don't want long-lived credentials, right? We don't want credentials that can be used at any time from anywhere. We want to make sure that the credentials are only granted when you should be authorized to have access to whatever it is. So one of the most popular ways to do this is to use OpenID Connect. Has anyone used OpenID Connect in the pipeline before? You know how it works. You know how the SPF API works. Okay, so at least I'll show you how it works today. And it took me a while, so I think that at least the picture is very simple. It's very nice to see. So at the very least, we're all just going to see how an OpenID Connect is used with the pipeline. And so this is the setup. We have our pipeline. So that could be your Circle CI hosted Circle CI thing. That could be like an account that you set up that is doing CI for you in your organization. Host, I don't really care what this is. It could be whatever it is that has the pipeline inside it. It could be GitHub Actions, anything like that. So you set up an OpenID provider, which in this case is a URL, and my URL is mypipeline.com, but this could be like GitHub or it could be Circle CI. I don't know what exactly they use like a URL, but they have these URLs. And so then what you do is you go into your AWS account and you configure it to trust that OpenID provider. Okay? So now you're saying, I'm going to trust this OpenID provider to identify machines to me. And so what happens when a runner spins up, it will go to the OpenID provider, it will identify itself, and then it will get a token called the OpenID Connect token. So what's happening here is that the OpenID provider has some mechanism to know that this runner is really a runner, right? So if this was Circle CI, then Circle CI knows, okay, this is really a machine that's in Circle CI. It should be authorized to claim that it's part of, ActiveCo's organization, and it's going to request a token that's scoped to ActiveCo or scoped to Project 52 at ActiveCo or whatever it is, right? So that is what you're assuming that the OpenID provider is smart enough to know how to do for you. So So you're trusting the OpenID provider to know that this runner is real. If it knows that, it gives you this OpenID token. And then what it does is you send this token, and I'm focusing on AWS here, there are lots of different places to work, but in AWS what happens is this token goes to the STS API, the secure token swap API, and then what happens is you get the token API will validate that this OpenID Connect token is correct. So what it's doing is it's going back to the OpenID provider and saying, is this a real token? Did you really sign this? Which basically just means they grab the public key from the OpenID provider to verify the sign. Okay, so that happens, cool. So now we know this is really a token. And then finally, it will say, great, so this is a token, it has a set of scope. I'm going to send back some temporary credentials, basically an IAM role, temporary IAM role, and now this runner has the credentials that it needs to actually do stuff and can actually like interact with the AWS API or whatever it is and do real things in the infrastructure, okay? So all of this is very time limited in the sense that the OpenID Connect token, the arrow that goes this way, is very short-lived, and then the temp credentials that come back is also short-lived. So you have this very short window where these credentials are granted and you can use them to actually do things. And so you'll find OpenID providers all different places in the CI/CD pipeline. You can even actually, I just learned yesterday that you can actually use your EKS cluster as an OpenID provider for the pods, which is a really cool way to authenticate pods and grant permissions to pods. So there's a lot of really neat things that you can do here. So again, I'll share the slides so you can have this picture for next time you want to try to put an OpenID provider somewhere in your infrastructure. Okay, so why is this helpful, right? Again, let's go back to my title, limit long-lived credentials. Why is this helpful? Well, your AWS account is trusting your OpenID provider. It's trusting that OpenID provider to actually authenticate the runners, assuming that it knows how to do that and it does that correctly, which is your assumption here. That may not always be true, but assuming that that's true and you can get hacked, then you can actually use the OpenID provider to get short-lived credentials to whatever it is that you need to give access to. Okay, so we've actually used this trust relationship with that green thing to allow us to have short-lived tokens that are granted to all sorts of machines. Okay? And the cool thing is that, remember my first point was if you have a long-lived credential, use it only once so that you don't have to spend 2 weeks trying to figure out how to rotate it, right? Here, you don't have to worry about rotating it because the credential is that green key that the OpenID provider has, and it sits at that URL. And what they'll do is it'll rotate, the provider will rotate it for you. Generally, it rotates every couple of weeks. If it gets compromised, it will be rotated immediately, and it's not really your problem because every time you want to validate a token, you just go to that URL and get the new token. So you don't have to rotate it. That's very cool. How many do we know? I don't know. I'm gonna keep going. So, those were my points. Again, like this is all extremely useless if your OpenID tokens grant you access to everything, right? So if I do that exact beautiful thing that I showed you, but then once the token hits the STS API, I get back temporary credentials that have full privilege access to every part of my AWS account. You haven't really improved security here, right? Because you've got way too much privilege on these runners, and so the runners have way too much access, and you don't want that. So we still need to worry about scoping. We still need to worry about minimizing the IAM roles and all of that. But it is a nice way to get rid of it. Okay. Last thing, a completely different threat model is to think about your code provenance. So far we've been talking about the users who get access to the pipeline and run jobs, or we've talked about the actual runners themselves, right? So something like Circle CI getting breached, or your Jenkins server getting breached, or your GitLab pipeline getting breached. What about the people that are actually pushing code into your repo that's going through the pipeline? Right, so there are a couple of tools that I just wanted to bring up. And again, and maybe what I'm saying here is obvious, but like just in the context of build pipeline security, it's really helpful to think about, making sure that when someone pushes a commit, it's really, Bob and not an adversary. And this is not a fake threat model. This is the SolarWinds threat model, right? This is what happens. So one of the ways you can do this is with GitHub signed commits. Another way that you can do this that is really interesting and very new and not super baked is called SigStore. Has anyone heard of SigStore? Yeah, so if you can use it with containers now. So SigStore is really cool because it allows any developer anywhere sign thing, and then any developer anywhere, any pipeline anywhere to validate things is not restricted to your specific org. So you can do code signing for open source software. This is just starting to date. I don't know that it's really practical for most people to use yet, but it's a new tool. But there are sign commits in GitHub. The limitation for the GitHub ones, as far as I understand, is that it's really only useful inside your organization. So if you're pulling code or importing libraries or open source software, you can't really validate those commits because you don't know their keys, you don't belong to their org, right? The keys are restricted to the org. But this is also helpful, and it's a separate threat model from everything we've been talking about. Okay, so just to wrap up, what can we do to make pipelines safer? If you have to use one with credentials, make them one-time use. Make sure that you scope each user's access to the pipeline. Make sure you scope different parts of the pipeline's access to the infrastructure. Logging. Try to get rid of long-lived credentials wherever you can. OpenID Connect is one way to do it, but make sure you're actually scoping OpenID Connect. So basically 7 means just because you did 5. The 6 means just because you did 5 doesn't mean you get out of 2 and 3 and 4. And then 7 is a separate part of this effort is to consider securing the provenance of your code. So there's a lot here, there's a lot to do. I don't think that this is something that is possible for every organization to do tomorrow. But at the very least, next time you put a long-lived credential into your pipeline, make sure you're not using it anywhere else. At the very least, walking out of this, that you don't have to worry about sending to you. Okay. And that I think we can all do now. And also, next time you're thinking about using long-lived credentials, try to think about maybe you can use short-lived credentials instead. There may be a way to do that. So it's also worth thinking about next time you're adding something. Just to wrap up, please reach out to me on LinkedIn. I'd love to talk to you about your security, your pipelines, your access systems. You know, we are thinking about user access to infrastructure. We're also expanding into pipeline and machine access to infrastructure. That's what we're thinking from. We've done some of this in the product, so that's interesting tool. If it's not interesting, I'd still like to talk about how you're building pipelines and where you see vulnerabilities. It's always helpful for us to look at. So yeah.
That was awesome. I learned some new stuff today. Thank you so much, Sharon. Another round of applause for Sharon. And what was that? Let's all say it together. What was it? Don't have
Zero trust.
Zero. Yeah, there we go. Or don't have long living credentials. Ready?
Get rid of your long-lived credentials.
There we go. So we're going to do a secure token swap to our next speaker. Carlos is a friend and a colleague. I had no influence on him being selected as a speaker, I promise. The other organizers can attest to it. And he's going to do an awesome presentation on more advanced usage of GitOps. So yesterday, we had that great talk about GitOps and how it works and how it can be used in your organization to more effectively store your infrastructure as code or what's going on in your Kubernetes cluster or environment, and use the kind of Git flow or Git process to trigger deployments. And this is now a presentation on a more advanced use case of that same pattern. So it's a nice 1-2. Yesterday we kind of did the basics of GitOps, and this is like the next step. All right. Yeah. Cool. All right. I'd like you all to give a. We have the presentation up.
Never got watched by the
Oh, yeah, there we go. All right, can I get a nice warm welcome to Carlos Santana?
Yes, and my name is Carlos Santana. No, I don't play the guitar. So yeah, great conference. I'm meeting a lot of people. Who's from North Carolina? Here's from the Triangle. Okay. How long have you been here? More than 5 years? More than 10 years? More than 20 years? Okay. I've been living here for more than 20 years. I moved from Puerto Rico, and the promise to my mom was only going to be 2 years, but that was more than that. But let's talk about a few things that I like about Raleigh. I'm living here in North Carolina. This works. Okay. So, we always have an agenda. So today we're going to talk about the data in your applications. For the most part, we're talking about stateless applications, but this talk, I wanted to talk about data in your application. GitOps for infrastructure, which is a new kind of term or paradigm. It's also related to platform engineering. And then disaster recovery, which I think all the DevOps engineers and SREs have to deal with it. But what I was going to say was that one of the things that I really like from North Carolina, that when I moved here, was going out and picking up fruits like strawberries and apples. Those are type of fruits that I don't have back home the pressure to pick up, like we had avocados and mangoes and those type of things. But apples and strawberries is something that I tasted for the first time picking up them here. And one of the things that my family likes to do is go out and take a lot of pictures. My wife takes a ton of pictures. Actually, it's me taking the pictures. She's usually the one in the pictures, and my daughter. And here's some pictures of us going out, like near my house. It's like 2 miles from my house, and we go to a farm. And every year around this time April or May, we pick up strawberries, and we get the buckets, and we put our strawberries in buckets, and then we take them home. And that's kind of a good activity. You plan to move here in Raleigh, that's one of the things that you can do here. So one of the things that my wife, like I said, takes a ton of pictures, put them online, and you can visualize here, like put them in a mobile app or a mobile application or a website or a platform. One of the things that if you're going to build an application, for example, if I'm going to build an application for her to store the photos, she wants to keep track of the views and the likes. And when we talk about data, the data could be the pictures that we want to store in the cloud, just cannot leave in the phone, right? We want to share them with our families. But that data, I need to save them somewhere. So if we're talking about DevOps and cloud, this is an example of put them in object storage, in this case in a bucket. But the other part that I need, if I'm going to build this application, I need a database, like to keep track of the likes and the views of that database. So the app is getting a little bit more complex. So there's always data associated with your application. And for folks that develop applications to be containers, to be serverless, you also have source code. And one of the things in DevOps that people don't talk about a lot is who's backing up the Git repo, right? Well, everybody talks about the data of the application, but also source code is stored also in object storage. They have databases. It's just we delegate that to managed services. For example, a Git server from a cloud provider or GitHub. But for this talk, we're going to talk about my application, and there's been a few talks here about Kubernetes. So this is kind of a Kubernetes 101. I talked to a few folks during lunch, and some of them told me, like, I don't want to know anything about Kubernetes. I just want Kubernetes just works, and somebody else takes about that. But this is kind of the typical pipeline of Kubernetes. So you put your source code, you have your CI pipeline, and I usually separate CI from CD. So CI, it takes care of building the container image and putting it in a registry, and that ends there. And usually that's the pattern that I recommend. Then comes the part of CD. And CD, the new trend, and you've seen some talks yesterday actually on GitOps, which is a good thing. They gave you the GitOps 101 of putting your source code or manifest or configuration, source code as code in Git, and then having a CD pipeline. And some folks who have it like imperative flow of using something like Jenkins, but also we also have GitOps, where GitOps will pick up the contents of Git and it reconciles that into the application, and the application gets deployed in Kubernetes and by pulling the image. So this is just kind of one-on-one if I want to build that application. I want to run it in a container, and then I choose Kubernetes. That I work, one of the projects that I worked on. So what happens there? So let's talk about CD. There's a lot of talks about CI. So in this talk, we're going to talk about GitOps. So in GitOps, when you have your code being pushed into the Kubernetes API, in that case, you're using it to deploy your application, and the application always follows what is in Git. So that's kind of the normal thing of using GitOps. And these are the two of the tools to do GitOps, and both tools are very good. Both tools recently graduated as CNCF projects. So for those of you that don't know what CNCF is, a cloud-native foundation where hosts projects like Kubernetes. Kubernetes is also a graduated project. There's a few projects that are graduated. There's different levels of CNCF graduated projects, but Flux and Argo CD are the two, I would say, most popular ones, and actually becoming popular in the enterprise for customers doing applications in the cloud. So, but I said that my application, I can write it in Python, I can write it in JavaScript, I can write it in Go, I can tell ChatGPT to build it, right? But my application, like I said, it needs more than just Kubernetes, more than just a container running in the pod. It needs data. So where I'm going to put my pictures, it will be an object storage. Where I'm going to put my database for my likes and my views, who's going to handle that? Am I going to have a different pipeline for that part and then a different pipeline for Kubernetes? Yeah, some people do that and they're successful in that area. But over here. So this is the typical, not typical, but this is what some folks do. They take some Terraform and CloudFormation, for example, CloudFormation or some other tool of infrastructure as code that maybe they own or another team owns, but my application is kind of small, so I'm going to be owning both. So I would need to know a little bit about Kubernetes, a little bit about GitOps, get my app ready, but then I need to switch hands or switch tools and use something like GitOps for my CloudFormation. But what about if I could use Kubernetes to provision the database and the bucket with my application as a composition, like both together? Like, what about if I can put in that YAML file that I put in Git that describes how much memory my application needs, what is the CPU that it needs? What about in there if I can put some extra information that says, oh, by the way, I need a database. Oh, by the way, I need object storage. So that's what we want to do, but Terraform and CloudFormation doesn't give me that. And there's other tools that will give me that capability that I want. Two projects that are open source. One is called ACK, which is AWS Controllers for Kubernetes. It's maintained by AWS, which I work for. And another project is from the CNCF Foundation, like I mentioned before, it's in Sandbox. It's called Crossplane. These two projects are controllers that run in the Kubernetes cluster that actually provisions infrastructure. And infrastructure meaning like cloud resources, and that can handle that GitOps pattern. So now I can put my files in Git, have something like Argo Flux, and then that will reconcile. So I can have that reconciliation in both sides. I can have reconciliation, and reconciliation is that act of how Kubernetes works of the desired state and then the current state. So it makes what is you want to do, you desire in Git or basically YAML files or Helm or other tools. I will create that, but it also does the reverse. If somebody by mistake changes something in the application, it changes something in the database or the bucket, that controller will reconcile. It has the capability to auto heal and then make it so that it always is a desired state. So that's kind of the pattern. And I was asking a few folks if they knew about Crossplane, and some of you told me that you already know about Crossplane. So this is a Crossplane 101 for those of you that don't know what it is. And like I said, it could be ACK, it could be Crossplane. Crossplane is just one of the examples. It's a CNCF project. So the way it works is we're building a platform, and we have a platform team. And this platform team wants to help me as a developer, give me that API or that user experience for a developer. But the platform team in this case, if they want to provide this self-serving platform, here, in Crossplane, you will create a managed resource, and a managed resource is basically a small YAML file, the same way you would define a config map, for example, or a deployment. It's a Kubernetes resource that they will put things in here. You will install in your Kubernetes cluster. In this case, this one says, I want a bucket. The name is test, and the policy is delete, meaning that this is probably going to be used for testing. That it will create the bucket, it will do your tests, put files in the bucket, delete the files, and then when that CR or manifest file that was deployed gets removed, also deletes the bucket. For production, you will see that you can change that policy and it will be different. So this is where Crossplane comes in. And Crossplane, the way it works is it works through something called providers, similar to Terraform. Terraform has different providers. Terraform comes as a CLI, but you have to come and bring up providers to actually talk to different APIs and provision aspects of it. Crossplane has the same capability, has a plugin or an extensible system where you can install in their AWS provider. For example, you deploy things in AWS or another cloud. It has a Terraform provider. If you have a little bit of Terraform and you have an HTML file, you can put that in there and they will actually deploy the Terraform for you. Also Helm, if you want to compose, like for example, in my application, the pod, the service, and the ingress, those type of things, I usually put them in a Helm. So you'll be able to combine that. And it will create the bucket and it will reconcile. So when the platform team starts building the platform, actually they're using Kubernetes as the platform framework to build the platform that they want to provide to developers. So they have a bucket, but they can not just give me a bucket, because usually it's a bucket, it's a identity role, that role is permission, so it needs a policy. So there's a couple of things that I need, and actually I also need the database. So Crossplane provides a kind of a programming model that you can create compositions of, like, think of it like templates. So in my case, my app for my strawberries, right, it needs a bucket, but it also needs something like the database. And that will give me the database. So if they add in the template a database, I will get my database through Crossplane. And then I was mentioning the identity, right? In this case, in AWS, we call it IAM roles and AIM policies. All these things that they need to be created by the platform team, they can handle that. And also this framework, what it does is reconcile. So the dependency of like creating the AIM role before you create the buckets, creating the VPC in this case before you create the database so you can attach it to the VPC. All those things inside the framework, it constantly tries to reconcile until every dependency gets met, and then everything gets deployed. So there's no need for the platform team or for the developer team to figure out what is the order of things that I need to deploy, right? It automatically detects the dependencies. And then that's how I get the AIM role. So as they add things in that composition, they will start provisioning aspects of that. And that's my app. My app doesn't need anything else. It needs access, it needs a bucket, and it needs a database. So the platform team basically builds a composition. We can call them maybe templates for the developer to access those. So this is kind of like the platform view of the framework. They create compositions based on the type of applications that the developer team, or in my case, I'm the developer and I want to build this web application for pictures. I will need this type of composition, and they can install it in that Kubernetes cluster. So, like I mentioned, the composition, I said like 3 things, but it will need more. Like in this case, if the Kubernetes cluster is going to access a database, That database needs to be attached to a VPC that my cluster can access, security groups, and so on. And this is where like developers that are like wanting to concentrate, and this comes from like the talk from today, early today, about platform. They want to concentrate on the code that they're writing, right? What is the Python code or the JavaScript or the front end and the back end that they're writing for the web application, because these are the type of things that they don't deal on the day-to-day basis. They want to have, in this case, another team deal with the platform, and I'm a consumer, me as a developer and just a consumer of that platform. So all these things can be templatized or make a composition in Kubernetes using Kubernetes APIs and everything. If you're using some Kubernetes in your company, then the folks working with that will be comfortable using that. And then comes the developer. So how a developer will consume this? Do I need to have a long, YAML file that has all these things in there and everything? Well, no, that's where the developer comes with a claim. So in cross-claim, there's a concept called claim. And who have used Kubernetes PVs and PVCs? Or persistent volume and persistent volume claims. So it's the same concept. The claim says, I want, in Kubernetes, like I want a 1 gig data, right? Storage format application. And the Kubernetes will provision a PV of 1 gig and give it to you. So in this case, the developer in my application, I built this one for my Strawberry app to store my pictures from taking stories. And I say like, my claim will be a very short file that says, I want maybe 1 for production, 1 for dev. And today somebody said that you don't need another environment, but some people have staging and pre-processing. So you will have 1 file like this. And these files I put, because I don't want to put everything in there, but I put like the most important thing, like the policy for production will be orphan, meaning that if this claim gets deleted, I don't want the bucket to be deleted. It's like, that's the data that I want to protect. Then multi-availability zone for the database. Maybe I want to change the logging of the duration of the database access, because maybe I'm troubleshooting something, maybe I do it in a different one. And then lifecycle days, so like how many days you want to keep the files in S3 hot before you move them to a cold storage class, right? Which it has a cost optimization aspect to it. So this is kind of the one way that if you use Kubernetes, you can build a platform for developers where they configure a simple file, like it could be a values.yaml or myapp.yaml, very short, to provision everything that they need, including the application. Remember that I said that compositions could have a helm? So deploying the helm and the data that they need. So once they do that, the claim will find the composition that meets those requirements, because there could be multiple compositions, different flavors of them, compositions that deploy on the cloud, different clouds, or just on premise. But in this case, I'm deploying to the cloud, so I'm picking up in my example, AWS provider, and creating that environment. And then you put them in one namespace and you get one instance. You create another namespace, maybe call it dev, put the claim file in there, and then you get another instance that you can delete and provision. So this is where we go into what I was saying, the orphan of the buckets and the database. Like if I delete the claim, I don't want stuff to be deleted, but what happens if I lose the cluster, or if I lose the database? So I'm doing everything through GitHub, but the one thing that I cannot do through GitHub is put my pictures in Git, right? And put my SQL statements in Git. Well, you can basically store everything and put them in Git, but it's not practical. So let's switch the story about data disaster recovery, meaning that you have to be sure that you keep and don't lose those likes and views from the database. And more important, if you don't want to get divorced, you don't lose those pictures. So in my house, I'm the IT manager of thousands and thousands and gigs of pictures. So if I have one job, will be like, do not lose and back up the photos that we take in the family. So in this case, for disaster recovery, there's a spectrum, and there's also a cost associated with it. You can have a strategy that is on one end, backup and recovery, meaning that I'm going to have one instance, and if something happens, I'm going to like recover everything from the backup. Where the other stream could be a multi-site active that is, I have, live, I cannot go down for that amount of time. And I need to have the fastest way to get the application up and running. So when we talk about disaster recovery, I tend to say, well, it's a spectrum, right? So you have to look at the trade-off. And for today, I'm going to talk about backup and restore because it's my own app, it's on my own picture, so it's okay if it takes me a few minutes or a few hours to recover, but I need to back up. Let's see. Next slide. So let's see one of the examples, practical examples. So we can start, and I have two examples in here for today. I'm going to talk about one of them. And let's say that you have a Kubernetes cluster and you have it in a region or an area of the cloud, and everything is good. I'll take the database as an example. And you have your EKS cluster, Kubernetes cluster, it has FCD associated with it. And Crossplane is deploying the database for my application. I'm putting my claim with my source code. It could be two Git repos, usually that's the pattern, but in this case, we're talking about the manifest files. So we put them in Git, and then a tool, in this case, for this example, is I'm using Argo CD. So Argo CD will see the claim that is sitting in Git, will send it to Kubernetes as a claim. Crossplane has a couple of compositions. It will detect that claim can be satisfied by this specific composition that will give me the database, the bucket, and my application, and it deploys the database. So everything's fine, everything's running, phase one of the project, and we celebrate. The second part is we need to have backups. And one way of doing backups in Kubernetes is backing up that data that is in etcd. And you can say that everything in Kubernetes is stateless, yes, but when it comes to backup and restore, and you want to back up certain metadata associated with that specific data that you have in the database, you want to back up. So Velero is one of the tools. There's many tools, actually, vendor tools that can back up that data that it sits in Kubernetes, meaning etcd. So Velero is an open source project that you can back up. In this scenario, you want to back up because you may expect to lose the database. So you back up that aspect using something like Velero. But Velero, in this case, can back up PVs and PVCs, but in my case, I have the database outside the cluster. So I will need to use the cloud provider capabilities to back up the database into whatever solution the cloud provider gives you. In this case, we have S3 as a good storage for backups of the database. So that's one thing that you have to do. Back up your database and back up your Kubernetes etcd. And one of the things that I learned very early in my career when I was doing backup was, maybe was on me, was you need to back up to a different place that actually the disaster is going to occur. And you've been surprised that people, in my early career, and then I found that that's a simple mistake, that people do the backups, configures everything, and they back up to the same place or the same region that they have, that the disaster could happen. So that's one of the things that you can do is back up to a different one. So what happens is, so the next thing is, let's say that a region is not affected. Usually the region is affected because there's a hurricane or something like that. But let's say that somebody misconfigures something, or maybe the cluster is having trouble. I want to change something in my application, in my claim, and I can on one region. Crossplane cannot access the database. Argo cannot access the cluster. So maybe the outcome of the decision making in that aspect is like let's create another cluster. We already have backups, so we create a new database, and everything, and the photos are already being replicated. So I lose the cluster, I can just delete the cluster, don't worry about it because I have backups. The next thing is you can create a new cluster in a different region or in a different place, and then use Velero to restore that information. So you install Velero inside the cluster, connected to that S3 that you were doing backups, and then Velero will run in the opposite way, doing the restore of that, and then everything will go into S3. One of the lessons learned in this aspect, when you do it, be careful that the configuration that was in the other one and the other place, it has specific things to the region. So one thing is like the region name. Other aspects to be the subnet or the availability zone names may be different. So that's where you can use something like webhooks in Kubernetes, mutation webhooks, to actually compensate those delta when you back up. So that's one of the things that you have to be careful. The other aspect is let Crossplane create a new database. So in this case, you want to create a new database from Crossplane, and then you start doing your normal cloud provider restore to restore that database content into it. And then you can start. So at that point, the application is up and running. You can access the database. I can access the S3 bucket. And if you want to make a change to the application, you will do it through GitHub. Well, guess what? When you create this type of platforms or interfaces, you don't think about backups and moving them to a different region. So sometimes these YAML files have specifics on the region, have specifics on the availability zone. So when you hook up Argo, maybe you have a lot of files sitting in Git, and you have to also compensate in that side. So I would say that's another practice, to use mutation webhooks from Kubernetes. And these mutation webhooks, you can do them simple as creating a web app with a webhook, or you can use tools like Keyburner, for example, that can do policy-based mutation. And that's basically how you recover a product. And this is a typical questions that I get all the time when people start with Kubernetes and start with GitHub. They ask me like, well, how do you recover? How do you recover stateful applications when you run in Kubernetes? This is one way of doing it, right? This is a two-stage process. You have to back up. Like I said, I didn't talk about backing up Git because I'm usually using a provider, but you have to back up your data. And that's the most important thing. Here are some resources. This specific scenario comes out of like 3 scenarios that are written in a blog post. That is recovery when using Crossplane for infrastructure provisioning on AWS was written by my team. There's 3 scenarios in there. Links to Crossplane, Velero, and Argo CD, which are the projects that I use for the scenario. And then we have EKS blueprints, which is also for my team in AWS, that we provide examples and best practices on how to deploy EKS solutions, based solutions, going from data on EKS, using Terraform, using CDK, using Crossplane. So if using AWS, you can get the resources there. And I will finish with that. The lessons learned about this is always backup. Test your backups, like they said in a previous slide. It's always a 2-step recovery, the data plus the metadata, and support your local farmers in doing it here. So always make sure that your juicy data is always backup. And I will finish with that.
Thank you so much, Carlos. One more round of applause for Carlos. Yeah. So we're there. We're at the end of DevOps days, we got one more amazing talk. So I want to kind of set the stage here. Imagine this, picture this, 2017, Washington, DC. I'm attending my first DevOps days there. I'm in a nice meeting room at the US Patent and Trade Office. And this gentleman, John Willis, steps on the stage to do a history of DevOps. Didn't know anything about DevOps, didn't know anything about John. And he proceeds to blow my mind with this whole entire deep, almost 100-year history, maybe a little bit less, of Deming and industrial process improvement, World War II, all these historical moments in engineering, in organizational theory that led up to that moment in 2017, to that day, that we're talking here about DevOps. And that was the moment after seeing John speak where I was enamored. I was like, I want to know everything about this thing called DevOps. So it is a huge honor for me to introduce John Willis.
Thanks so much, man. Matter of fact, I learned a hell of a lot from you too. You used to be a doctor. When I first got the doctorate, you were a doctor captain. And so I was asking you a lot of stupid questions too. So not that your questions were stupid. Hey everybody. So anyway, just a little bit of a backstory. I was originally going to come here and give a presentation on automated governance and all this cool stuff I've been really focused on. A couple of times in the DevOps sort of history, some young people that committed suicide. And I'll tell you the story of a couple, and there was a gentleman about a month ago that I felt like he was on my watch. And to the credit of the organizers of this, like I threw a sort of monkey wrench. I said, hey, I know you want me to come talk about the new book I have, and like it's all about automated governance, like so like cool stuff to talk about in the DevOps conference. I said, do you think you'd want to do a presentation on burnout? And by the way, you guys don't know, but I'm on the core organizer list, so I see all your conversations. I always try to tell all the local DevOps, like, I'm one of the original sort of DevOps days, so I see, fortunately they didn't say anything nasty about it, they said all good things. And they all unanimously agreed that this would be a good thing to do this. So I normally, I don't know a better word used than sort of our brand, my brand. So normally I get up here and I really want to impress you about how knowledgeable I am, and I want to make you laugh, and I want to, and I'm known for those type of presentations. This is not that presentation. This is a somber presentation, but I believe that the same reason I asked the organizers to be able to give this presentation is the reason I want to do it is I don't want any more people to die on my watch, right? So anyway, just a little bit about me. I've written a fair amount of books. I've been doing this for an awful long time. I've done like 12 startups. I've written like 12 books. I will be giving away that book called Investments Unlimited, which is not about investing, by the way. It was a terrible name. It's actually a story, sort of Phoenix Project-like story for security. And then I'm really proud of a book that took me 10 years to write, and it's actually on Amazon right now. You can pre-order it. It's about Dr. Deming, and literally it's sort of my white web. I currently work for a company called Costly. If you want to know more about that, just pay me or look me up. And like there's no such thing as a shameless plug, there's just plugs. So this is, I'm pretty proud, this is a book that I've been working on 10 years. Like I've written a bunch of books as a co-author with other people. This is the first book I've written by myself. So it's pretty cool to see your book on Amazon that you've written all by yourself. Like it's pretty cool. So I'm very excited about this. Anyway, we started. This is my experience of burnout. I don't want you to take anything clinical away from this. I'm not a professional. I'm giving no advice. I'm just telling you some stories that I've learned that maybe help people think about it, right? So let's be really clear, there's nothing I say or should be taken as if that I have any clinical advice, because I am not an expert. Edvard Munch, you probably heard Edvard Munch, The Scream, right? It's a famous painting. I love Edvard Munch because maybe it's the dark side of me, but I think that like more than The Scream, this picture is called Red Virginia Creeper. And I think it describes burnout, probably in every industry, but like certainly in our industry. You know, somewhere, I know Julie asked the audience, she shared, I wasn't here yesterday, in fact, I was kind of suffering a little bit of burnout myself yesterday, but she shared her slides with me, and she asked y'all, and I heard like the third, which is usually, you know, it's actually higher in most cases. So this is a Red Virginia Creeper. Burnout is, it just always amazes me is when the sort of conversation dies and we're not talking about it, how it's just still there. It's just like sitting there like a plate. So I think Julie covered this yesterday. There's a gentleman, Herbert Rudenbaker, who basically described this idea of burnout, like 1970. But what's interesting is it was actually, there's a lot more literature. One of the interesting things about burnout is most of the knowledge we have about it comes from academia. So it really isn't a science. But probably more, and here's the other thing too, like, I'll mention somebody, Dr. Christina Maslach, who is the single most authoritative person on occupational burnout. I actually wanted to talk to her before this presentation. I talked to her yesterday. And, you know, and there's like, one of the things I didn't understand when I first started talking about burnout about 8 years ago was the relationship between suicidal ideation and burnout. And it's not clear, but in the Japanese culture, they've done a lot more research on the relationship between sort of burnout and suicide, or death, what they call sort of death by, or so this is death by overwork. So this is, and there's like really good research, government research, something that we really haven't done here. In fact, most of the research, again, here is more academic. And the truth is, the academics don't really agree on what burnout really is. So there's this other sort of form. This is like an extreme form, which is actually the term refers to suicide, particularly suicide. So again, I just wanted to point out that there's a lot more information about this topic if you, in these slides will be, in fact, the slides that they probably gave you have been changed, so I'll make sure you get an updated copy. But if you want to learn a lot more about the research, there's a lot more research done as the relationship between suicide and burnout. So my story, where I was in burnout, I didn't choose burnout, burnout chose me because, but like, again, sometimes I look at this again and I like can't help but cry, but like, so the DevOps LA, I had been going there for like, since about 2013, maybe 12, every year. And this young gentleman, Carlos, would always come up to me, just like a couple people I met today, like you, would just come up, and we'd meet at conferences and he'd sort of ask me questions and I'd sort of mentor. And this young gentleman wanted to do a startup. And so 2 years prior to, you know, he'd, John, what do I do? How do I do a startup? What should I know? I'm like, and he was just incredibly polite and like, just treated me, you know, just, you know, like, he was a beautiful young man. So I show up in 2015 and I have breakfast with Nathan Harvey. And he says, did you hear about, and I'm terrible at names, like I've been terrible. I could blame it on old age, but I've been terrible at names my whole life. And he says, did you hear about suicide with Carlos Flores? And I'm like, no, oh, that's terrible, you know. And then I'm doing the closing keynote that day, and I'm sort of like, in my mind, I'm like, where is this kid? I don't see him anymore, right? And I'm sort of like, but I'm not like connecting the dots. And then they start off the session with, can we have a moment of silence? And I'll try not to curse too much, but it fucking hit me. It was him. And then they showed his Twitter handle. I went out of the room, I called my wife, I'm like, I gotta come home. She's like, you can't come home. After the keynote, I'm like, I can't speak. She's like, God bless my wife, she's like, she talked me off the ledge. And spent the rest of the day, but I was so, I mean, look at this young man. I mean, everything you see in that picture is like, he was so like awesome, right? And so I had to write a blog article about this. I mean, I'm not doing this for promotion, like, okay, I'm taking advantage of people's debts. That's not what this is about, right? I just had to get it out. And there was some interesting things that happened. There was a guy named Stephen Nelson Smith, one of the early pioneers of Chef. He wrote a book called Test Driven Development with Chef, right? It was a critical book. In fact, it was the first book that actually talked about using containers way before Docker for high-scale testing, right? And he was in Tel Aviv DevOps, and he's speaking, and I'm there in the back room, and he says, yeah, last year I almost committed suicide. And the whole room, like Stephen Smith is like, you know, sort of an icon. He was about 8 or 10 of us that were original DevOps days at Get. He was one of them. So I go up and hug him, I'm like, oh my God, you know, don't ever, like, you call me, you know, like, but like, it knocked my socks off, right? And then there was another gentleman sort of in AWS out of Atlanta that committed suicide. But when this kid, it was like, okay, enough is enough. So I wrote this blog article, and over the next 3 or 4 days, we had 300 comments, getting emails. I get emails from somebody who's been in the industry for 6 months, or somebody who's been in the industry for 25 years. Everyone would start with, please don't tell anybody, but let me tell you my story. And I had, when the Red Virginia Creeper was like, oh my God, like, this is far worse than anybody could have imagined. So I wrote this blog article, it was still out there. And so then, okay, so I started doing keynotes. There's some videos out there where like people would invite me to do a keynote on burnout. And I start with like, I will just tell you my experience, can't give you any therapeutic. And you know, I did that for a couple of years, and then sort of the noise level of the discussion, you know, it pops up periodically. And then about a little over a year ago, I get a call from this gentleman called Jesse Getzi. And we're me and my family, like, it's really cool. Like, one thing that I love about Disney, my 25-year-old, my 20-year-old still want to go to Disney with me and my wife. Oh, that's pretty cool. So we're at a Disney property, and if you're part of the member, you get to go an hour early. So we're about to hop on the bus, and I get this call. One of the things I always say is, like, if you're within my sphere, and you're thinking about you need help, call me. Right? I actually, as a side note, at a DevOps Day in Amsterdam, I gave this presentation on burnout. And, like, it was one of those ones, the room was packed. I, like, did a great job, and I just wanted to run off and get water. You know, sometimes when you're speaking, it's just like, the only thing I'm thinking about is getting on stage and go get some cold water. And as I'm going out like a door like that, there's this young man, he says, John, can I talk to him? Just hold on a minute, and I turn, I see a little bit of a teardrop inside. I'm like, holy shit. And I just said in my presentation, if you're within the drop, and I almost ignored this guy. And it turns out, like, we went about an hour and a half and sat down, and he was crying and talking about burnout. And so, like, you know, it can catch you off guard. Like, if you want to be that person that tells people, I want to be there and help you, you've got to show up. So this guy, Jesse, called me as we're leaving for the bus with my family. And when you have 21 and 25-year-old kids, you cherish any time they want to spend with you, right? So some of you older people know that, right? And he calls, and I get the sense that this is a suicide situation. So I'm like, honey, oh, I hate to do this, but go there, I'll meet you in the car. So I got a phone, and the interesting thing was, he'd come through the tunnel. He'd made it through. He wanted to call me, because he knew I did podcasts, he knew I'd talk about, and he wanted to tell his story about how he almost committed suicide, and how his journey was to get through it, and how he went to a clinic, and how, like, it's a two-part. I mean, we probably did an hour and a half of podcast. He even had like a code word with his wife. Like, he figured this out, and the only reason he wanted to do this was to save people's lives. Like that's why he wanted to be on this podcast. He wanted to tell people that if you go through what I went through, there is a way out. Here's how I found my way out. And he was classic technician, right? Like he literally sort of did analysis of what sort of clinic to go to, right? But of course, that's what a program would do, right? So great, like, I mean, it's great, like, you know, and like, it's out there and it's pretty compelling. And, so a year and a half later, here he is, Jesse, you know, look at these young people, and you say, holy shit, right? What, wow. I'm in Oslo about a month ago, February, well, a little more than a month, February 27th, and I get a call from the guy he works for, Chris Blackburn, who owns a consulting company called Liatro. And the thing about Liatro and Chris Blackburn, like, they were like a 30-person consulting company, and they literally gave Jesse time off. And that's hard to do when you're a consulting company, small consulting company, because you need people to be available, right? Like they were really helpful. They actually did sort of a watch for him. Everybody watched out for him. I mean, they were surprised. And he called me and said, Jesse committed suicide. And, you know, again, I don't know if you know anybody. And these are not even people that are like close friends with me. These are people that I've met. Like this guy, I never met him in person. But I spent an hour and a half on, you know, I spent an hour on a call with him for the Disney, and then we did these 2-part podcasts. And I got to know him pretty well. I mean, really well. When you start having a conversation with somebody about suicide, you get pretty close to them. And I was like in a bad way. You know, I think it still affects me right now. And that's when I thought, like, okay, I need to sort of kick some dust, shake some tree branches. And that's why, again, I pinged the organizers, and I think it's awesome that they saw the value in this, you know. And I've got the blog article, it's called This Sucks. You know, and by the way, you know, the guy who created Debian, Ian Murdoch, he committed suicide. The guy who created Engine Yard, I can never pronounce his full name, but he committed suicide. Like, so, you know, it's out there, right? There's a young woman, a hacker, I was going to try to add it in my presentation, just read something on LinkedIn just 2 days ago. She committed suicide, right? Like, it's out there. So the thing I like try and sort of, when I did my presentation 2015, 2016, I focused on burnout. And I guess I didn't really understand the differences between sort of occupational burnout, chronic stress, clinical depression, and suicidal ideation. Of course I would. I'm not a professional. But here's the other thing. The professionals don't even understand the difference. Again, I just spoke to Christina Maslach. She's basically, she's a PhD from Berkeley. She is the foremost authority on burnout. In fact, the canonical psychometric survey for burnout is called the Maslach Burnout Inventory, MBI, and I'll show you an example of that a little later. Like, and she was saying, like, we don't know. We really have no idea. Like, you know, some people call burnout a clinical. She says it's not clinical, it's not health, it's not mental. She says that it's chronic stress that sort of gets you to this place that we still don't really understand what burnout really is. I'll break it down a little bit. You know, understanding clinical depression. Now, burnout can lead to depression. I think Julie said this yesterday, right? But it also can lead to suicidal ideation. But like, there are other things too, like depression. So like, there's this weird mix. I'm sorry if I'm bumming out right now, but like the point is, and the point I'm trying to get to is, like, we don't have to know, and there aren't any clinical agreement on what all these are, but we got to understand the differences and be able to at least help the people. Like, one of the things that's great about DevOps, right? I've been doing this from the day I was the only American at the first DevOps day in Ghent, right? And me and David Edwards started with a couple of people, started the first DevOps day in LinkedIn in Silicon Valley, right? And to this day, I say this is an incredible community. Like, you know, like, what are the conferences that you go to where you can basically walk up to any speaker and have a conversation? What are the conferences where there is typically 99.97% no egos? Like, there's not a lot of conferences where that doesn't exist, where there's a velvet rope. Like, we're a really awesome community. And like, let's be awesome about like trying to figure out how to help people in our community. Like, you know, and I don't think it's that hard, so again, I'll have some more advice on it. And Christina Maswick says this idea like the pebble in a shoe. So, you know, like the interesting thing about Jesse, and again, not to play armchair psychologist, but I did talk to Christina about this, is that and she calls it the pebble in the shoe, right? In other words, it's that sort of pebble that you just can't get out of your shoe. And so even though you think, like in his case, problem solved. In some ways, I think, okay, the problem you have with suicide is you're like, oh, I wish I would have called, or I should have called him. And like, you can't think that way because you don't have that control. But the thing that is like in some cases, it just doesn't go away, even though it sounds like it went away. Right? It's the pebble in the shoe that just, no matter what you do, it's like still there. So which leads to like, here's the thing, right? In 2015, 2016, I was like right after this slide, the rest of the slide will not be as dark. It'll be more about like how it can help and what we can think about. But what I did, that was my presentation 2015, 16. I didn't really focus in on the really scary stuff. Just like, we don't really want to talk about scary stuff, right? And I think we need to, like, there's a line that we have to understand. And like, if you do any of the research on suicidal ideation, like, if somebody is vocalizing suicide and you want to help, get them to professional help immediately. That, the defining line between burnout is like terrible, and I'll talk about the things that it hurts the industry, it hurts organizational performance. I mean, all those things are still true. And when I don't think I really understood the difference between like any of these sort of like patent characteristics. Like again, we want to watch out and we want to take care of our DevOps family. Like we need to be like, drop everything. And I don't know, maybe you don't want to be that person. That's okay. I'm not saying that like I'm a good person, you're a bad person, whatever. But like, these are the things that like, I guess I didn't really understand. Like if somebody uses the word suicide, they're serious. I mean, with the fact that that word came out of their mouth. There are other signs like avoiding social contact, preparing, like some like, okay, there's certain things that they're doing. Being a little more risky, now it's a little, little sort of squishy, externalizing anxiety, like, I don't know, is it worth living? Those kind of things, giving away perception. In other words, the point I want to make is, like, we could talk about burnout all day long, and it's a good conversation to have. But if you're gonna take watch, then like you really need to understand this, because there's a difference between having a conversation that says, I'm burned out. Oh, what's your problem? Let me hear what you have to say. And I'm thinking about ending it. Completely different paths. Am I making sense, or is everybody like, what the hell is that? Good, yeah, thumbs up. So how can we help? All right, so that's so like enough about suicide. But again, one of the things I was interesting is, in 2015 or 16, we ran this big thing at Interop, of all places, hardcore networking. We were having a burnout session, and they invited, it was Vegas, we invited somebody who was a professional psychiatrist or psychologist that worked on a suicide hotline. And one of the things he said I thought was interesting is, you think having a conversation about suicide is like, oh yeah, no. Or even what he said is like, you would think, like, even if you had like the suspect that somebody might be thinking about it, like, if I ask them, they might commit suicide. It's just the opposite. What it really is, he said, the best thing you can do is if you think somebody is contemplating suicide, asking them if they're thinking about suicide. What he said is, it gives them a sense like, how do you know? Right? Like, so our instinct is to stay away from it. We don't want to talk about it. And again, like, I'm not telling you have to. I'm just telling you it'd be nice if we watched out for our family. So what isn't helpful for burnout? Hopefully everybody in this room and like listened to Julie's presentation yesterday, like, burnout is not cool. It's not like, man, I'm more burnout than you. No, I worked 60 hours last week. Well, I worked 70. You want to see my burnout, right? Like, like there is a part of all communities in tech that sort of talk about it like a badge of honor. It is not cool. Like, use some other word. Like, I work harder than you, but like, don't use burnout. So like, I really sort of, it annoys me when we sort of like miscategorize what burnout really is. And even like just sort of pure exhaustion. There's a difference between just working really hard and exhaustion and what Christina Maslach would call, real burnout. Confusing stress with chronic stress. There's Kelly McDonald, she has The Upside of Stress. It's a great book. I mean, stress is what flight or fight, right? It's where like we survive because we adapt to stress. So there's a lot of positives in stress. So it isn't just that stress is bad. There's a lot of what we can do that stress is part of what makes us. Mistaking burnout for depression. Again, it goes back to what is the difference between depression and I don't know, but there's a difference. And I think I'll say this, like, and this is not clinical advice. Like burnout, you can have a long conversation with somebody in general. Depression, you probably want to point them to some clinical help, but I think you can have a good conversation. Suicide, no conversation. Get right to professional. Again, converting burnout with suicidal ideation. And then the not talking about this stuff. There was a Velocity conference where, it was after I wrote that blog article, it was a Christina Maslach was there and they were interviewing her and they asked the audience, like, how many, like it was just like, hey, reach out if you're thinking about this. And almost everybody in the room said, yeah, I did. And boy, people ran away from me in the hill, like shying away from these conversations doesn't help, right? So avoiding any of these discussions is not going to help our family. So what is burnout? It's a canary in a coal mine. And like, this is where I get sort of like DevOps-y in a sense. Like, I mean, there's an argument today to business leaders that burnout is bad business, right? There are some characteristics of burnouts that are basically the anti-patterns of DevOps. And I'll show you those a little bit, right? So it is a canary in the coal mine for many things, depression, bad health, but low performance organizations. And in fact, like the DORA, a lot of the DevOps research actually have really good psychometric data pointing to burnout and organizational performance. So the lagging indicators is, like I said, burnout is bad business. There's healthcare costs, lawsuits. Bad performance could be sort of negligent. The turnover. We have, people sort of leave jobs and leave jobs and leave jobs, and because literally it is really burnout, it's not really the job. The optics, the Flores, a week later, so he actually jumped out of a building, right? A week later, somebody from the same company jumped out of the same building. Now, I'm not going to say that was the company, but man, good luck hiring people, right? Or, and it's just in general, like, it doesn't have to be suicide. Like people, they leave a company and like, why did you leave? Oh, that was, if I would stay there, man. And then you start hearing 3 or 4 people said that, right? Like, so there is an optimization opportunity here to get this right. There's leading indicators, right? Like, which is missed deadlines. Here's the other thing too. A lot of times, I'll show you some more research by another, Dr. Julio, where a lot of times the people who, in general, based on her research, that are some of the top performers that actually are more susceptible to burnout. Now, this is her research. So imagine that you have this trust in these people. You don't actually see it. It's not like on Tuesday, oh, they have burnout. Like, it takes sort of 6 months to fall into this. So your top performers are missing deadlines, but you're not really understanding it. They're not creating the opportunities that normally they were creating. They might be security professionals or whatever who are in charge of like protecting the brand, and just lower innovation, right? So there's sort of industry opportunity to sort of address this. And this is the the Jerry Pulio, right, which is, she says, based on her research, it's called a BDoc, that it takes 6 months to get to burnout. It typically takes 2 years to get out of burnout. So imagine that, right? And then there's all this sort of rebound, like, you sort of get to a certain state. I mean, if you look at, so I wrote that blog article, and then like a week later, his daughter sent me an email from the Jesse Getsy, which, sort of talked about breaking your heart. Like, she was like, "You're a beautiful man, and, thank you for sort of talking about it." But just, this is sort of weird. Yesterday, I got an email from his mother. Imagine that. She didn't know I'm coming here to speak. And like, she was sort of diagnosing that, like, his wife left him. Right, so maybe his recovery, the pebble in the shoe was still there, and his wife, I don't know. But the point is, there are these rebounds, that when that pebble is still in your shoe, like, like, I don't know how to get the pebble out of your shoe, other than, I guess here's another thing too, I think, again, my non-clinical observation is that I think a lot of people tend to be, "Oh, I'm okay now," when they're not really okay now. So you gotta be careful of that, right? There's only so much you can do, but like I don't want people worrying about me. And most people don't want people worrying about them. So you're sort of quick to navigate to, like, I'm okay now. And maybe you're not. So leading to burnout, like lack of control, unclear job expectations, dysfunctional workplace dynamics, lack of social, I think work-life balance, we'll talk a little more about that in a little bit. Christina Maslach has done some incredible research on work-life balance and burnout. There's the industry and humanity course, right? Leaving the industry. So, like Stephen L. Smith, I mean, one of the top chef thought leaders, left the industry for like 5 years. Because burnout. Like, thank God he didn't commit suicide. But I don't want like brilliant young people to sort of leave the industry. Like, that's a loss. Alcohol, heart disease, blood pressure, vulnerability, and then again, suicide. But like, again, think about it, the guy who, Ian Murdoch, who invented Debian. We lost that guy. So, I had this thing, there's debate on whether burnout is a clinical, Christina Maslach says it isn't, so I'm going with that. What is the science? I would say there really isn't any good science. It's academic research, which is, good enough. But so Christina Maslach created this thing called the MBI, the Maslach Burnout Inventory. And it's sort of simple. It's what's called psychometric surveys. So psychometric surveys are done by psychiatrists, and it's a combination of psychiatry and statistics. It's like heavy stuff, right? But it's like asking you questions on sort of psychological, societal or sociological questions, but is created by somebody who really understands statistical analysis. Not an educated way to explain it. So this is a psychometric survey called the MBI, and it really looks with 3 categories: exhaustion, cynicism, and efficacy. So exhaustion is basically, completely exhausted. And like, I think in our industry, and I've had this conversation, my theory that's not based on data, because I'd love to run an MBI on our industry, which I never get around to sort of kick it off. But I think in exhaustion, we have more of a, like we're kind of intelligent, we're less susceptible working in companies that sort of treat us really terrible in terms of our work. Now, I make that a general, because most of the people in this room are pretty qualified, probably can find a job pretty quick in most industries, minus what's happened over the last 6 months, but typically this is an industry where we can find work, and I would say we mostly don't have to tolerate like what they call death camps or death march work. Cynicism is the depersonalization. It's typically the kind of person that gets to a point where they say, everybody else around me is an idiot. I'm just going to do it this way. But I think the real danger zone in our community is efficacy, which is you get into this, if I went back to Carlos's Twitch stream, and it's just basically armchair psychology, right? But if you look at his Twitch show, he started like talking about a week before he committed suicide about how he didn't believe that the place he worked thought he was worth what he had. And then it just got worse, and you could almost see it become psychotic. Like it became a boogeyman. And I can't imagine anybody in the room doesn't sort of fall into this trap of worrying about like, do they really appreciate me? Now, most of us sort of do that, and we sort of get through it, but imagine taking that to, a vicious cycle of efficacy. And I think efficacy is probably what sort of harms us. Because the other thing in our industry, we tend to, a lot of us work in high consequences businesses. So we had this other realm of like all of a sudden I'm turning knobs and writing programs that could basically shut down half of the country if it's down for a couple hours, depending on what you do, right? Like where you work and what you're. So efficacy is an interesting one. And so it's called the MBI. And like there's an interesting that MBI for like $10 you can take it. You go out there and you just sort of take this thing, and it basically asks you a ton of questions, and it basically gives you sort of a ranking. And Josh Corman, one of our sort of top security people, amazing mentor to me, but he, in the security community, I think about 10 years ago, they ran an MBI. So you can run a general population MBI, just go out and do it, and you get sort of categorized with the general, whoever takes it. Or you can run your own sort of industry-specific one. And so they ran one as part of like RSA with like, I don't know, like 300 security professionals. And the data was alarming. And like as Josh said, we got tired of losing our friends. So we had to make we had to understand it. What was interesting for me is when I was doing my first couple of presentations, I thought, okay, I'm going to run an MBI for myself because this is going to be cool. I'm going to show it in the presentation. So I ran it, and you notice the efficacy thing where it is. It's a 4. Like that's in the 96th percentile. It's like really bad. And so the joke was on me, right? Like because actually when you run a report at the end of it, like if you're, I think anywhere in the top end or bottom 10%, I don't know what the category is. It tells you to get clinical help. So in I'm going to show everybody jokes on me. It literally told me because of how I rank on efficacy, I should get clinical help. Now here's the thing. I was working at Docker. I sold a company to Docker. They wanted me to move out to San Francisco. At the time, I lived in Atlanta. My $300,000 house would have cost $3 million. Wouldn't have had a pool. Wouldn't have lived on a cul-de-sac. My kids' education, my oldest son went to a public school, which was the 75th best magnet school in the country, free. That would have been about 150, 200 grand. I mean, like, I wasn't moving to San Francisco. But here's the thing, so like, and again, this is a remote. I was like one of the few people that were remote in Docker, right? And, so on a Wednesday, I find out that they have a meeting about DevOps and DevOps strategy. And I'd be like, what the hell? How come I didn't get invited? And it was driving me. It was just made me crazy, basically. And when I did this, I realized, oh my God, like I know why I'm so depressed right now, burnout. Because we saw that efficacy thing, and I'm like, and here's the thing, I was able to use it in a positive sense because every time I get frustrated in the future after this, I'd say, John, I know you're upset they didn't call you into that meeting, but do you want to move to San Francisco? Hell no. Okay, then shut the F up. Right? I found it so helpful for me to use this, not even knowing it was going to be used as a tool to help me understand what I didn't even understand. Oh wait, there's more. So one of the last things that Christina's been working on for quite a while now is this, it's called the 6 organizational risk factors for predicting burnout, work-life balance. And what's interesting about this, and I'll show you the 2 books that she has about this, but it's the 6 categories, but the difference is the MBI is all about you. It's asking you a bunch of questions about yourself. What I love about this is really sort of these are the anti-patterns of DevOps. And by the way, it's a balance. In other words, it's not looking at how your workload overload or lack of control or insufficient rewards or breakdown in community or absence of fairness. It's a balance between you and your employer. So that what that means is maybe you're not working in the right place. So this is a much better analysis for yourself because, like, take for example, absence of fairness. I've built a lot of startups. I want my salespeople to make more money than God, right? But you might be a developer who gets very frustrated. Like, how come they make way more than the developers? And that's a legitimate complaint. But the question is, if you're working in a company where the owner believes that salespeople should be the highest paid people, and it is one of those pedals, it's about a lot of pedals, then maybe you're not in the right place. Maybe you work in a company that is very, very liberal, and you're a conservative. Right? Smaller companies tend to have that. Small as in 300 people or 500 people. Maybe you're not working in the right place. So the thing I love about the workload balance stuff is it's not just the person, it's the balance of these things. And Christina said one of the things that when she's written books about this is people come up to her and say, I thought it was just me. Right? So again, I think I really like this because it's not just a one-way street. It's not just that's bad company, I'm a good person. It's the imbalance. Right? So it's another form of a survey that you can take to try to understand the balance. Now, I think this could be, again, a performance optimization opportunity. Imagine your corporation could figure this out for hiring and all those good stuff. So this is the 2 books by Christina Maslach. So a couple other things. It's interesting. Back when I did this in 2015, I took this quote. Men, it should be people are disturbed, but he's basically 500 AD, so they just use the word men more often. Men are disturbed not by the things, but the view of what they think. This is so me. I could give a presentation and watch the Twitch stream, and everybody's like, it was great, it's great, it's great. And one person said, that guy sucked. And then all of a sudden, by the end of the night, still I'm thinking about, by the time I go to bed, that's the whole thing I'm thinking about. So, I love this. But I saw about 6 months ago somebody put another quote by, and it's this. It's from his writing. There's just so much there, and this now I'm starting to read all of his stuff because it's incredible. The life advice of this Stoic philosopher, in 55 AD. Of what he was trying to tell us and how appropriate it is now. Just a couple more things before I wind up. There's this other stuff called the danger zone. What we want to do is live in what's called a balance between going back and forth between what's called the comfort zone and the learning zone. We know the learning zone, right? What we're learning, we're constantly learning. But we need to basically step back. And because even I love learning, right? I love doing research, but you have to smell the coffee. You have to step back. And you have to learn how to balance between those two. And there's some really good literature on that. And that keeps you out of what they would call the danger zone. I think what can we do to help people? Know when to talk and know when to listen. Because sometimes when you're talking to people that are stressful or in a situation where they might be burned out, the appropriate thing is just to listen. And be able to tell when. When do you need to talk? When do you listen? Being vulnerable. Getting up here and literally talking about your anxiety or depression or yes, I've seen a psychiatrist. I have seen a psychiatrist. I've battled anxiety at times in my life. It allows other people the opportunity to tell you things. And being vulnerable is what will save other people's lives. Being courageous and just being kind. I will say, what is the cost of a compliment? Anybody want to guess? It costs you nothing. Ben Franklin's quote, right? Like the Constitution gives people the right. But you have to catch it. I think I'm done. I am going to give away free copies of this book about automated governance here in the back of the room in a couple of minutes. And the people I work for asked, because it is about a $20 book, that if you hit that barcode, you got to fill out like 2 or 3 lines and just show me that on your phone. I'll give you a copy. I'll sign a copy. I hope this helped. I don't know. It's a somber way to end. But it was an awesome tech conference. But I just wanted to sort of get some messaging out of like how we can probably think about helping people in our community. A lot of people, you know, this is a plague that sort of it is part of us, and to ignore it. I've got a bunch of links. I'll put out. Anyway, thank you so much.
Thank you so much, John. Another round of applause for John. I really appreciate you talking about this. It affects us all, and I hope we can take to heart some of the advice we learned today. Thank you again. John will be signing books in the back of the room while we do the raffle. So either way, you're getting a prize. So catch up with John is it the right of the stage? Oh, the left, over there. He'll be over there. And are we gonna get ready for the raffle? Are we doing that? Okay. We're gonna rush through some closing remarks. I'm gonna grab my closing remark notes. First of all, what do you think of the last 2 days? Yeah? Please go right now to devopsdays.org/Raleigh and sign up for 2024. I expect to see you there. Here's my trademark closing remarks. You need to explore Dora as your comparative North Star. You need to version control your data with DBC. Avoid DevOps anti-types. Make a golden path. Reduce cognitive load. And then you also need to have an MVP, an MVP on your MVP, right? The most valuable behaviors on your minimal viable platform. Whew. Y'all can do whatever you want, but at the same time, you aren't going to need it, right? So you can do the hackathon, but you don't need it. We've lost the water cooler. Make executives see the cool shit you're building. And building without listening guarantees ghosts of baseball legends won't come to your platform, right? Tough crowd today, jeez. Bad name for today, Evil Metrics, but a close second was Flops Per Watt. That was a good bad name. You want to shift left, or your left, and right at the same time. You want to use metrics for evil. That's the main takeaway I got out of that lightning talk. Probably not the right takeaway. Immersion cooling, right? So there's going to be a sentence in the future. Jim, my pool is warmed by my LLM servers in my basement, right? With that immersion cooling. You want to ask Sharon about blockchain. That was a real tease to what that startup was that she created. And then your CI/CD platform holds all the keys to the kingdom, and you want to limit your blast radius. Not too bad, right? Did I do all right summarizing? Yeah. All right. I can't leave this without a poem, right? So one last poem for the road. Stick around for the raffle. Are we almost ready for the raffle? All right. Stick around for the raffle. And before everyone leaves, can we give a big round of applause to all the organizers and volunteers and people that make this happen? All right. Closing out to DevOps Days. A community of innovative ways. Thank you for coming, one and all, to share, learn, and have a ball. From Agile to automation, our DevOps discussions and presentations have been lively, enlightening, and fun, with knowledge sharing second to none. We've made new friends and connections, discovered new tools and directions. Together, we've explored and learned, and our DevOps community has furthered. So here's to you, our wonderful guests, for joining us on this DevOps quest. We hope you had an amazing time and continue to thrive in your DevOps climb. And with that, let's stick around for the wrap-up. All right.